I'm Chris Esty, and I had the incredible honor and privilege of being Dave's best friend for the last 32 years. So this is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because there's simply no words to describe Dave Mobed. If you were lucky enough to know Dave, then you also know that you didn't just sort of meet Dave, you experienced Dave. Dave was funny, Dave was generous, Dave was loyal, Dave was lovable, Dave was smart. But Dave was also stubborn and headstrong, and Dave did things Dave's way. I first ran into Dave while I was fundraising about 32 years ago. I was following up a few days later, and me being me, asked if he would maybe consider increasing his donation. That's when Dave told me the amount that I gave, that was my entire month's salary. And that leaves me with no money for food, gas, insurance, my car payment. I was shocked at the incredible act of generosity, and I was speechless. And that's when Dave said, would 1,300 more help? No words could explain how I felt at that moment. I knew that I had either at that time met the most generous person possibly on earth, or else somebody who was really horrible at managing money. And it turned out it was both. I decided then and there that this was somebody who I would spend the rest of my life trying to help, trying to work with, trying to improve his life in whatever way that I could. And I befriended him for the rest of our lives together. But that was just the beginning of what I would learn about Dave Mobed. Over the next few months, as I got to know him, I learned that he was making just a little over $2,000 a month working for Smart Foods, which had just been recently purchased by Frito-Lay. I told him that was absolutely unacceptable, and that he was going to need to make a lot more money, not just for him, but for my sake as well, because I was going to be the person fundraising him and trying to get him to contribute to these various projects that we were working on. So with a little coaching from me, he got a series of raises and promotions, which by the end of that year, he broke the record, not at Smart Foods, at Frito-Lay, for the most raises and promotions anyone had ever had, to the point where finally at the end, the management just said, I don't know exactly how Dave does what he does, but pay him whatever he's asking for. And they did. I'm pretty sure that his boss and his boss's boss still haven't forgiven him, because he was actually making more than the plant manager at that point. After all this, I decided it was time for Dave to make a big boy donation and really make a leap of faith and give me a sizable donation. So I went to Boston to do a fundraiser, and turns out I chose the weekend that there was going to be a big nor'easter. And I'm sure I didn't say that right. But anyway, the event basically got snowed out. And man, this donation I was going to try to get Dave to do had to happen. And man, I just decided that night Dave was going to get some good old-fashioned religion, and I was going to say, hey, this planet, and this is your responsibility too. And I was really driving the point home. We were having coffee and a pie, and Dave said to me when I was all finished, very stoic, are you done? Man, that just lit me up. I said, no, I am not done, mister. Here you go. And I just gave it to him hard for another 15 or 20 minutes, at which point, again, stoically, he looked at me and said, are you done? No, I'm not done. And I gave it to him hard for another 20 or 30 minutes until I was just completely exhausted, out of energy, and I had no bullets left in the chamber, at which point he lifted up his plate and gave me the signed donation slip for exactly what I had been asking him for. And I yelled at him, what are you doing? How long has that been sitting there? And he said, most of the time. I mean, well, why didn't you tell me? He said, well, I asked if you were done. Pure Dave. that was just Dave's way of just being so generous, but at the same time, just trying to mess with you. For Dave, it wasn't really about the money. It was about his ability to help people, and he liked to help as much as he could in any possible way that he could. And so also, along with that came his pride and joy, which was his American Express card. He had a platinum card. He loved the perks. He just felt like, hey, he could be on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous with this thing. So one day about 30 years ago, I got myself into a little bit of trouble, and I knew that I was going to need a little bit more money than I had available for me for the next 30 days. So for some reason, I don't know why, I called Dave. We barely knew each other. We'd only met twice at that point, but I just felt like he's somebody that would be willing to help me. And I had to get a signed slip from him that would say, yes, I authorize Chris Esty to debit X amount of dollars. There's a few $1,000s. So he sent that slip, and then as it turned out, I was wrong in my calculation, and I actually needed another $2,000 more than I had actually asked him for. And completely embarrassed, I called him again and said, hey, Dave, is it possible that, you could send me one more signed authorization slip so I could use a little bit more money? He said, yeah, no problem. I said, I really don't know how long it's going to take me to pay you back, but, you have my word, I'll pay you back. Pure Dave style, he sent a letter that said, this time, please authorize Chris Esty to use an additional $2,000 from my card and consider this a blanket authorization for him to use as much money as he needs with no further authorization from me. Who would do that? Who would do that for somebody that they barely knew? But that was Dave. He would just give just about anybody the shirt off his back. And fortunately, he mostly trusted the right people, mostly. For the last 2 years, Dave had Tampa Bay Buccaneers season tickets. And this year, he only ended up going to one game, and him and I didn't actually get to go to a game together at all. But he did give me tickets a number of times that I could go to a game with my son, my grandson, and it was terrific. And again, that's just Dave being generous. So Dave says to me about a month ago, he said, hey, I'm considering not renewing my season tickets for next year because I only went to one game and blah, blah, blah. I said, I think that's a great idea, Dave. I mean, you're spending way too much money on this and you don't need to. And he said, take the other side of the argument now. He said, well, but if I didn't have the season tickets, you wouldn't have taken your son and your grandson and, you wouldn't have gone to those games because you're too much of a cheap ass. And I said that he was probably right. I was a cheap ass, but that I would still buy a couple of tickets, and that was no reason why he should buy tickets. You don't buy tickets so your best friend can take his people to a game. And Dave, of course, was unemployed at the time. And I'm like, Dave, you just don't do that. Come on. So he said, well, he'd take it under advisement. I said, well, look, if you decide you're going to buy these season tickets, at least let me pay half. It's only right. Now, I'm a cheap ass. I don't want to pay the half. I don't want to spend that kind of money. So just don't do it. So he said he'd let me know in a week or so. So called me about a week or so later and says, hey, I thought about what you said, being willing to pay half and stuff. And I thought, well, the truth is those seats weren't very comfortable. So I went ahead and I got us a suite, and that's a lot more money. So now you owe me half, $28,000. Of course, he didn't do it, but literally, I thought we better check his credit card statement because he actually might have. Anyway, last year, unemployed Dave took his nephew Jake to the Super Bowl, and again, I yelled at him, but by the time it was all over, he had spent almost $30,000, but that just wasn't good enough. He had to bring home swag for pretty much everybody. I got keychains and cups, and I think pretty much anybody in his family got lots of swag as well. And, with Dave's explanation for that was, you're not going to spend $30,000 and come home empty-handed. It's just Dave doing something completely outrageous, but then still thinking about everybody else. So Dave loved to take the opposite side of almost any argument. And him and I don't think we hardly ever agreed on anything. But what he kept telling me over and over and over was, we're very different personality types, but similar personalities. I always try to deconstruct that. I don't know if I ever did. But it was usually sometime when one of us would say something that would just make the other one shake his head about. Now, one of the things about Dave was that he was a New Englander through and through. Just for years, he just told me about, the seafood and the chowder and the leaves changing. And if I ever said anything about fall and leaves changing, he's like, well, there's nothing like New England with leaves changing and autumn and fall foliage. So we joked about how we would make our annual pilgrimage to New England around Columbus Day to see the beautiful leaves changing. And for years we swore we would never miss that, and we would do it every single year. In fact, we even called it our annual pilgrimage. If we did our annual pilgrimage for the first time about 6 years ago, and he was right. The chowder was amazing. The leaves were amazing. We toured for 4 or 5 days. We went all through New England, and then topping it off, we wound up in Maine at Bar Harbor, and we had the lobster rolls. We ate at Red's lobster rolls, and it happened to be the night they were closing for the season, and they had a lot of lobster left over. And I think we each got a lobster roll with about 3 lobsters in it, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And we joked that we would never, ever miss it again, never miss our annual pilgrimage, but we just did it that one time. Dave's loyalty was completely unmatched. He loved New England, and as much as he loved New England, he hated California and hated Florida even more. But despite that, agreed to move to California when I had my company there and help me run it, which he did for several years. Pretty much complained about it every single day. And then when I moved to Florida, he said, well, you're never going to get me to Florida. Of course, probably a lot of you know that, in fact, he did buy a condo in Florida, which he swore was just temporary, and that he was going to be going back home to his beloved New England. Dave was also fiercely competitive every single time we would play racquetball. This is going back about 25 years ago. I didn't know it, but I had 2 herniated discs, which had been diagnosed, but I also had a spinal tumor that was slowly paralyzing me, and I was in a lot of pain. And I would go play, and I would fall, or something would happen, and he would just make some sort of remark under his breath about how I was just, needing sympathy or being a baby or whatever. And his humor was really an effort to say, hey, I don't feel sorry for you, and you shouldn't feel sorry for yourself. Get your shit together and do the best you can. When I would get on Dave about his when I would get on Dave about his smoking or other bad lifestyle, his eating, different bad lifestyle choices, he told me the story of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who were fierce rivals, and he loved this story. They were fierce rivals in life, in their political career, both signers of the Declaration of Independence, and they both basically swore an allegiance to outlive each other no matter what they had to do, that the other one would die first. So he would tell me this story, and it turns out they both died 50 years to the day after the signing of Declaration of Independence. July 4th, 1776, they signed it. 50 years later was when they died, both within a few hours of each other, each one thinking the other one had outlived the other one. And Adams said on his deathbed, "Jefferson lives," as his last and final words. And Dave always told me that my final words would be, "Mobed lives." Despite his lifestyle choices, despite not eating the way he should or smoking or whatever it was, that I would do that. He was generous, funny, stubborn, fiercely loyal, competitive. He pushed me to do better. He pushed most people he knew to do better. He pushed us to live better lives and to be generous, and always set an example of caring and loyalty and generosity that I don't think we'll ever see again until we see Dave again. So as we remember Dave today, let's honor him the way he would have wanted, which is to laugh at the absurdity, cherish the moments, and never forget the generosity, the mischief, and the stubborn love that he gave us all. And at this point, if you don't mind, please join me in giving him this one last thing, because as we know, the body dies, but the spirit lives on, and a piece of Dave will remain in each one of us. So let's let Dave know that we know that he will go on. If you would join me in saying, to give him this one final win, Mobed lives. Thank you.